Hi, everyone. Today I want to talk about how to use quotations. How do you embed quotation marks and quotes from other sources into your essay? And I cannot take full credit for this. I got some of this information from Ms. Chandra Griffin, who created her own PowerPoint and loaded it to the internet, and I have adapted it for our purposes. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is what is a quote. Most of you probably already know that a quote is short for the word quotation. And it's basically words that someone else said, but I want to use them in my paper. And I have to do that in a certain way so I don't get into trouble. So, what kinds of essays am I going to have to do this with? Well, critical analysis essays are one kind of essay where we use quotations. Research essays use quotations, facts, figures, information from another source. So do persuasive or argumentative essays. And also informational essays can use quotations. So it's really important to know how to do this because the chances are good you will have to do this in the future. Now, why do people use them? We know people use them, but why? One reason people use them, the biggest reason, is because it makes your essay stronger. It makes your news article, your writing, whatever it is you're doing, it makes it stronger. And we also, if you all watch the news, you notice that they use quotations even in the news. How does it make your essay stronger? Well, it makes your essay or your presentation stronger because it increases your own credibility. It means you did some research. These ideas are not coming only from your mind, but someone in the field has thought of this and written about this. It also gives you evidence. And the key here is it's relevant evidence. It's evidence connected to your topic that helps you to support your ideas and your topic and to explain your ideas and your topic. And really and truly, it helps protect you against plagiarism. Every year, there's even PhDs who get in big, big trouble because they do not cite their source. They don't say where their quotation came from. So this is so important to protect yourself. And it also shows your instructor. It shows your classmates. It shows just whoever your audience is that you understand how to include outside sources and that you use outside sources. So let's just talk about some do's and don'ts with quotations. Let's go through the do list first. First, you do need to use quotations to support your examples and to provide evidence for your point of view. You also need to explain your quote after you cite it. So after you use a quote, you have to explain it to your audience. Even if you think it makes sense, I don't need to explain it. Yeah, you do. You do need to explain it because your audience may interpret that quote in a very different way. So you have to explain how it connects to what you're talking about. And then we have to talk about some don'ts. And there are some don'ts. Do not use quotations in your thesis statement. Do not use quotations in your topic sentences. And after this video, which will be a bit long, but after this video, you should understand why we don't do this. You also do not use quotes alone without any support. So a quote cannot be a whole paragraph of your essay. You have to explain it. You have to support that quotation. So what I'm going to introduce to you is something that people will call ICE. It's possible you've never heard of this before because different writing instructors use different things to teach this, but the idea is more or less the same. So maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't, but the idea of ICE, you have to introduce your quote, you have to cite it, and you have to explain it. Okay, so we're going to talk about each one of these. The first one, introduce, is the longest because I have a lot of examples of how to do this. So if you feel like this is not what you need, you know how to introduce, please feel free to skip around in the video. So we're first going to talk about introducing your quote. It sounds easy, but sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. So there are actually 4 different ways you can introduce a quotation. The first one is with a complete sentence, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. The next one is with an introductory phrase. I'm also going to show you what that looks like. The third one is to only use very short quotes in your sentence. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And number 4 is with part of the quote paraphrased. And again, I'm going to talk to you about what that looks like. Let's start with number 1 with a complete sentence. So, to demonstrate how to introduce a quote, we are going to use a small part of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream. This is a very famous speech, so if you're not familiar with it and you just Google I Have a Dream, put the quotation marks around it, I Have a Dream, and you will find it immediately. And I think you will realize you are familiar with it. This speech was delivered by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on August 28, 1963. At the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. So again, if you Google it, I think you're going to find that you're familiar with it. The quote that we're going to be working with today is, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So if we were together, I would ask you, what does this mean? And usually people say, well, it means he has a dream about his children. That is true, but the good part is actually what comes after. He dreams that his children will be judged by who they are and not what they look like. So I think we all hope that for our children and for the children in our lives. So we're going to use that quote to talk about these 4 ways to introduce quotes. So let's look at the first one. The first one, just to remind you, is introducing your quote using a complete sentence. So you can absolutely introduce a quote using a complete sentence that describes the quote or gives some kind of information about the quote. But to do this, you punctuate with a colon. And we've talked a little bit about colons because colons can connect to full sentences if their ideas are closely connected. Colons can also be used as kind of a definition. There are 4 ways to introduce quotes, colon, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. You do not say 1, 2, 3, 4, but then you can list them. So it's like a definition or a list. So let's look at what this looks like. So in our example, I just want to remind you, complete sentence. So here we go. In his I Have a Dream speech, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, colon, and then the quote. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So let's look at a couple of things. First, please notice that this is a full sentence. Your subject is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Your verb is had. Your object is a dream. So that's a full sentence. So you have to put some kind of punctuation. And the best punctuation here is a colon. And you see it right there. And then notice your quotation marks and notice how they're punctuated. There's only 1 space between the colon and the quotation mark. And at the end, the period goes inside the quotation mark. So this is one option that you have. It's the first one. I will be honest with you, I don't usually write my quotes like this. I have, but I would say it's maybe 5% or 10% of the time. If I write 10 essays that need quotations, maybe one of them would I use this, but it is perfectly grammatical. So the second way is to introduce your quote with an explanatory phrase. I use this a lot. It's the one I use probably the most. You will begin your sentence with a phrase that introduces the quote. And then you put a comma and then you have the quote. And this is what you see a whole lot in your fiction books. We see this a lot in fiction and in the news. It's a comma and a quote. So let's see what that looks like. Using our example, in his famous I Have a Dream speech, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, comma, quote. So what you notice here is that the comma is not inside the parenthesis or the quotation marks, is outside. And then I went too fast. And then again, notice at the bottom, your period is inside your quotation mark. This is very common. You're probably quite familiar with this way, but it's not the only way. So the next way is to include only a short quote. So not instead of, I have a dream today that one day my 4 little children, instead of writing all of that, we're only going to write a piece of that. So you only write a few words, not the whole quote. And I use this a lot when I do literary analysis, because sometimes the quote in the book is this long and I can't use all that. So I'm going to summarize some of it and then have a quote of the most important parts. So what does that look like? You do put quotation marks around the author's original words, and you punctuate the sentence as grammar tells you to punctuate it. So let's look at that. Here's our example. Dr. Martin Luther King dreamed of a day when his children would only be judged by the content of their character. So if I'm in this paper, the most important piece is content of their character. And you can notice there is no comma here because I'm summarizing. This is some paraphrasing or summarizing. And then I do not need a comma here because I'm not using a word like said, explained, declared, stated. I'm not using a verb. I'm in the middle of a phrase. I'm actually in the middle of a prepositional phrase. So just the quotes, no comma, and still look that the period is inside the quotation marks. So that's the quote. And then that's where the quotation mark begins, no comma. Okay. So the fourth way is introduce your quote by paraphrasing the quote, which is very similar to the last way. You begin by paraphrasing the quote and then finish with a quote. So this is very, very similar to the last way. Dr. Martin Luther King dreamed of a day when his 4 children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So actually, I've had students ask me, what's the difference? In this example, we don't see a huge difference. But sometimes in your own critical analysis, you will notice I don't need to paraphrase the beginning. I just need to set it up with maybe the main character's name, and then boom, I can write. Or I need to, some of you, if you're writing about a movie, you need to kind of paraphrase the action that takes place right before the quote. So you'll paraphrase that action and then include the quote. So I don't want you to list the 4 ways and show me examples. I just want to present the examples to you to help you as you're writing your essay. Again, notice, much like the third one, here you don't have a comma, you just have your quotation mark. So let us take a look at that. So this is the quote. and no comma, just the quotation mark. And again, the period is inside the quotation marks. So I'm going to show you some more options. This might be a little confusing, but I want to show it to you. When you're ready to try one of these, they're available to you. So the first one is you can say according to. So according to Dr. Martin Luther King, because your source would go here. Then you use his quote. I have a dream today that my children, da, 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 and then at the end, we would add a citation. I know you don't know what that means yet. It's coming up next in the video, so stay tuned. According to Martin Luther King Jr., and now we paraphrase the information. No quotation at all. According to Martin Luther King Jr., he had a dream that one day his children would be, I want to say judged, that one day his children would be seen not for what color they are, but for what is inside their hearts. That is a paraphrased statement, but I still need to put a citation. I still need to say that Martin Luther King Jr. said that, and I still need to say that it was in 1963. So we'll talk about that a little more. The other example is you can have, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed that blah, 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 the quote, and then the citation. Or for instance, and now it's all paraphrased, men like Martin Luther King dreamed of a world in which his children would have opportunity based on who they are, not what color they are. So that is paraphrased information, but I still need a citation. So I know this is a lot of information, and you may have questions about it, and that's totally okay. You can Google it, or you can let me know, or anyone you trust who you think might know how to do quotations. Please ask them for more information. But that's how you introduce a quote. Step number 2, and I have other videos on this, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but number 2 is citing. So number 1 is introducing the quote. Number 2 is citing that quote in MLA format. Other instructors may have you do APA, Chicago style, or one of the many other kinds of formatting. But for us, we always do MLA in my courses. So how do you cite in MLA format? Well, there are 2 different kinds of citations that need to be inside your essay. The first one is an in-text citation. So you would have, according to Martin Luther King Jr., comma, people should be judged by who they are, not what they look like. Now I need an in-text citation, so parentheses 1963, because that's from his speech. That's the date of his speech, and then a period. That's an in-text citation. The second kind you need is a works cited page, and we have talked about this before, so I'm hoping you remember that's a separate page that says works cited and then has everything in alphabetical order. If you don't remember that, there is a video available to you on YouTube that will walk you through that. So let's first talk about that in-text citation, because we have not talked about that a lot. An in-text citation is a reference to the original writer, the original creator. And in-text citations tell the reader, hey, that person quoted somebody, and I can find the original document if I look up information. So I can find Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech if I go to the works cited page and see who wrote it, what date it was, et cetera, et cetera. So this may not seem important to you right now, but especially if you're analyzing some of the films, sometimes films are remakes. So they were made in the past and now we're remaking them. Even like The Lion King and some of these Disney movies now, Beauty and the Beast, Mulan. I know Mulan is coming. So we have the cartoon and now we have a live action. So putting the date will tell me as a reader, are we talking about the cartoon, the Disney cartoon from the 90s, or are we talking about the live action film from the 2000 teens? That's why that information is important. So you also need a works cited page, and we've talked about that. So I'm pretty sure that most of you are comfortable with that. But it is a separate piece of paper at the end, and you'll have a list in alphabetical order of every source that you used. For many of your classes, you'll only have one or two sources. But once you're in your junior year, your senior year, or if you decide to go to grad school, your list of sources can be like 3 or 4 pages long for your thesis work or your dissertation. So it's very important that you start now just getting in the habit of organizing that information. And each citation is formatted to MLA style, and you can see the video I created on that. So I have included here the list of resources. So once you have access to my PowerPoint, you can easily find those things to help you more. So the last piece, and it's kind of the easiest to explain, but the hardest to do and the hardest to remember to do, is to explain your quote. Sometimes we put a quotation out there and we think, well, everyone will understand this. Don't do that, because not everyone will understand in the way you do. So you are using this to support some idea you have, but maybe I have a different idea. Maybe my idea is really, really different. So you have to explain. So explaining your quote, after you introduce it and after you cite it, you have to explain it. You have to explain it. You got to. There are a couple different ways. Actually, there are more than a couple, but I'm going to talk about a few different ways that you can explain a quotation. One is to provide an analysis. So you need to connect that quote to your topic sentence in that paragraph. You cannot be talking about how J.K. Rowling explores romantic relationships of teenagers, for example. You can't talk about that and then your quote is something about Lord Voldemort. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. So any quote you use has to be directly connected to your thesis statement and your topic sentence of that paragraph. So every sentence is connected. It's not random. You need to explain, or you can explain, why this quotation is important. How does it help you prove your point? And you have to, again, all of these, make sure that this quote supports your topic sentence, the main idea of your essay, or your thesis statement. Everything is connected. It's like a big circle. It all connects. At least that's how we write in English. So here are some sentence starters for your explanation part, not the quotation part, but the explanation part. You can say, this proves that, not the strongest, but we're working towards stronger sentences. So this is going to move us in that direction. This illustrates, this shows, this highlights the similarities or the differences or the importance. Let me go back for just 1 second before we talk about the sample paragraph. The third one is actually my least favorite, but I like it better than it says or it means, because says and means, there are not the strongest verbs that you can use. I know you are capable of using really strong verbs that communicate your ideas. You are welcome to use a thesaurus and try out new verbs. If it's not correct, it's okay. A tutor or someone at a writing center or an instructor will correct you and help you pick the right one. but I would like for you to move away from what is comfortable now and try some things you're not sure if they're right. We don't grow unless we experiment. So I definitely want you to experiment here. And so I'm going to end this video by providing you with an example paragraph. This is not my paragraph. This is from Ms. Chandra Griffin. So I definitely want to give her credit and not be a plagiarizer. So here is her example paragraph. The invention of the traffic light by Garrett Morgan made automotive transportation safer. That's my topic sentence. Okay. Before the traffic light's invention, and I only have a comma here because before the traffic light's invention is a time expression. It tells me when. It's a time expression. And in English, after time expressions, I need that comma. So that's why there's a comma there, not because of the quote. I just want to make that clear. Before the traffic light's invention, it was not uncommon for bicycles, animal-powered carts, and motor vehicles to share the same thoroughfares with pedestrians. Accidents frequently occurred between the vehicles. Okay, here's what's important to note. This is what we call an in-text citation. It's in parentheses. It's the title of the pamphlet that this came from, and the period comes after the parentheses, not inside the quotation mark, because my sentence is not finished yet. So what I want you to notice here, topic sentence. Oh, and my picture. I'm going to move my picture. And this is the introductory phrase here. So if we look here, this is the introduction before the quote. It's very short. It doesn't have to be long. And then you'll notice the quote. And now the quote is long. It's 2 sentences. That's okay. You don't want to quote a lot. At this point, we're not going to quote a whole lot. There's a way to do that, but we usually save that for literature analysis. And usually students do not choose to do a literature analysis. If you choose to do a literature analysis and you need to quote a lot, please come talk to me or go to the Writing Center or a tutor, and they will help you format that correctly. You can even Google quote, paragraph, MLA, and you will be able to find resources to help you know how to do that. But for us, that's not necessary. So you notice the quote, please notice the punctuation. And then this last sentence is going to be our explanation. After the invention and implementation of the traffic light, again, this is like a time expression. It tells us when. The number of collisions was reduced, and thus created a safer environment for automobile travel. So this last part is the explanation. So you have your topic sentence, you have an introduction, you have a quotation, you have an explanation. So for our purposes, this paragraph is quite short. It's usually much longer, depending on the topic of your essay. But this is how you put quotation marks into your essays. I really want to thank Chandra Griffin for her original PDF or slideshow that was uploaded to Slide Player. And that concludes my presentation on quotation marks. If you all have any questions, please let me know. I'm very happy to answer questions if I can. And good luck adding quotations now to your essays, speeches, or other class projects.